Well, we're back again, and this time it is with part 3 of what I really want you to know from Chapter 4, Video Lecture 4C, which is the steps involved in doing a job analysis. And a couple of ideas from this that I really want you to take with you as you are doing your preparations for the first exam, which comes up here in another week or so, depending on which semester you're doing this course, summer or fall or spring. But we'll spend some time today talking about those steps that we go through, and let's go ahead and get started. Here you see the overall 11-step process. We're going to look at each one in a little bit more in depth, but if you wanted to refer to this thing without having to maybe to print the PowerPoint or whatever, you could look at table 4-5 in your book and have these things available. And the first of the steps that we need to take care of or to consider is to gain the support of upper management. Now, it may seem much more logical to say, you know what, we need to analyze what's involved in this job. Let's go watch the people who are doing this job. And it may be that we got a typo on here, doing A and S instead of and. I get distracted very easily as I do these videos when I notice little things that annoy me that I made those mistakes. But it's important to get upper management support, because there will come a time when you have to enlist the participation of a person who's doing the job or a manager who's overseeing the person who's doing the job, and they're going to be reluctant, perhaps, from time to time, because this doesn't necessarily seem to them to be a very valuable contribution to their day. In fact, it seems to be probably in the case a lot of times that this is taking me away from something that's important. And it may be that you get pushback. So if you start with upper management support, it's easier to have the leverage that you need to get people to cooperate with you when it's time to actually do this stuff, so that when you say, listen, I need you to come and talk with me, take an hour away from your job and come talk about what you do, and they say, well, you know, that sounds great, but it doesn't help me get this report out on time. You can, however delicately you do it, you can say, well, this is something that we're working on with the support and the blessings of the CEO, who wants us to get this done. And if they were to go and say, listen, they've asked me to do this, do I really have to? Upper management says, yeah, we really expect you to take the time to do this. And managers as well. Now, it may be that you're doing this because upper management has asked you to, so you've already kind of got the support that you need. But it's also likely, maybe even more so likely, probable perhaps, that upper management doesn't necessarily see the value of this process. They think that things are going along pretty smoothly as they exist now, and we don't really need to spend a whole lot of time looking at this. And you may actually have to spend some time with upper management and convince them that getting much more significant job descriptions is good for the organization in the long run, and that the time that it's going to take to do this is very, very well spent time in the big picture of things, especially if you can really make the connection between a good job description and success with the overall organization's strategies and vision and mission. When you start using terms like that, when you can start to demonstrate a connection between something that you want to do, a project that you're looking to accomplish, or something that you wish to purchase, and the contribution that it makes to the overall organization's strategies and vision and values and mission and so forth, you begin to get upper management support. So start with upper management before you spend any time at all interviewing people and talking to people. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't start the planning of this thing. You probably have to do some planning to figure out what the process looks like, what kind of resources it's going to take, because that's going to help upper management decide to support you on this. But once you know what you want to do, who it's going to involve, what kind of time and resources it's going to take, then you can go to upper management and say, this is our plan, here's our objective that we're trying to accomplish. And oh, by the way, when we are successful with this, this is how it's going to help you do your job better. This is how it's going to help the company become more successful. Here's how this process is going to cause us to accomplish the goals that you've set, the strategies that you've implemented. And the direct connection between that not only helps them to see that this process is valuable, but hey, you HR people seem to know what you're talking about, and you're doing things that help the organization as a whole. So first of all, gain upper management support. That's a test question. What's the first step? Is getting the support of the people who can kill the whole project just by snapping their fingers, or who can give you the resources you need to get it done. Once you have the upper management support, step number 2 is to communicate with the participants. And generally speaking, in advance, communicate with them what you need, what you're trying to accomplish, why it benefits them, what you are and are not trying to do. You remember back from the slide from the last video lecture, the defensiveness and the mistrust and the political and the territorial. If you communicate ahead of time, this is what we're trying to do, this is our objectives, it's easier for them to say, yeah, I think that's worth my time. So perhaps even schedule appointments. Next week we want to use an hour of your time. Not like, can you be here in 5 minutes? But I know you got a lot going on. You're very busy. You're very, very important. And the things that you're working on have got to be done because there's deadlines and things. So in the next week or so, we're looking for an hour of your time. Check your schedule and see when it would be convenient to you to come talk to us about what you do and what you're contributing and how the great things that you're accomplishing and why you're so valuable to this organization. But again, in a way that doesn't cause them to think that you're suggesting that they're not. But communicate with the participants in advance. How much do you need? What do you need? Why are you doing it? How are you going to do it? Those kinds of things. While you're waiting for those appointments to become realities, okay, we're going to talk to you next Tuesday at 4. Between now and next Tuesday, there are things that I can be doing. Certainly a lot of the job analysis happens because you talk to people who do the job, but you got to know what you want to talk to them about. So step number 3 is to gather background information. Do what research you can about the job before you talk to the people who do the job. Look at similar jobs that you've already done a job analysis for and estimate where there may be some similarity. Maybe look at the jobs that your competitors have, or jobs that you're finding in the community or across the country. Do some research online for jobs that have this title to see what they do. Not just this one person that you're getting information from, but other people who do this job or who work with people who do this job. Get their input. Look at if you've got an existing job analysis, what that job analysis says with the person specification and the essential and desirable qualifications and the job description and the essential functions and whatnot, to get an idea of what it has at least looked like in the past. If you don't have a current job analysis, job description, specification, you can't do much in terms of this part right now. But you can also look at the people who are doing this job, and you can pull copies of their past performance appraisals, because there are probably goals on the performance appraisals that measure their success at doing their job. And by looking at the appraisals and looking at the goals, you got a 4 out of 5 on this, a 3 out of 5 on this. What are those things that you scored? Those are probably related to the essential functions. So look at that. Kind of start building your little database of what this job does by looking at what we've measured related to this job in the past. Look at your recruitment tools. Perhaps you've got job ads that you've run in the paper in days gone by, or you've got blog things or paragraphs that you've posted on Monster or Indeed or in LinkedIn or things like that, where you've kind of summarized what you're looking for in this job, and that can give you an idea of what this job as a basis to talk to this person. Training information. Look at what records you have about the kinds of training that you've offered to people who do this job. If there are kinds of themes around that training, those may relate to the essential functions. And then there are outside sources. There's a great internet source that's called ONET that gives you job descriptions for particular job titles. Now, when you get ready to do your job description after watching this video, that may be a temptation to go to ONET and to figure out what they say about this job title that you have. But keep in mind that job titles are pretty generic and they may look very different from one company to the next. So you might go to ONET and get some ideas, but then think about this particular job in this particular company and what applies and what doesn't. So do some background information. All right. The next step is to create task statements, and this is probably happening while you're talking to the participants. So you've set up an appointment time with them, you've done some research, now you're talking to them, and you're comparing what you hear from them with what you've learned from your background information, and you're beginning to say, okay, there's some overlap here between what I've seen and what I'm hearing. These seem to be pretty common, these seem to be pretty important. So create task statements, summarize in a phrase what you hear, which may be the beginnings of the essential functions of the job. What are the most frequent tasks? What are important tasks that may not happen very often? What are the observable things that you do? If I ask you to summarize in 2 minutes what you do, the things that come to mind the quickest are probably the essential functions of your job, and they're very identifiable. But not only do you want to figure out what is done, I put together this report. You also want to dig into how it's done, because putting together this report may be a 2-minute process or it may be a 2-week process. So how it's done is important understanding information part of what it is that you do. Why it's done is also important. I don't know why I do it. They just tell me to do this every month, versus they use this report to make a decision on how much to purchase next month. That's very significant. So create the task statements, which may be very loosely worded generic phrases about what seems to be the most common things, which ultimately turn into your essential functions, although they're not quite there yet. They still need to be massaged a little bit and reworded and tweaked in order to get them right. Step number 5, once you kind of know what those basic task statements are, then you begin to figure out what those qualifications are that are necessary to do those things. So for example, one of the essential functions of a truck loader is to lift packages. Well, in order to lift a package, you need the ability to pick up 50-pound things, to waist height, or you need the ability to make decisions on what you can lift and what you need help to lift, and so forth. KSAOs are a frequently used term in HR that relate to the person specification that stands for knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, and they kind of overlap a little bit in their vague idea of what they mean. Knowledge is facts that you know, or processes that you know, information that you have, that you've learned at some point in the past and that you can recall from your memory because you understand it, you remember it, and you know how to apply it. So knowledge are things that you've read in a book or things that you've done before, and it's kind of a checklist of things. I know how to do this, I know how to do this, I know how to do this, and I can remember that because I've learned it at some point in the past. Skills are those psychomotor activities, using your hands and your feet and things like that to do those things that you know about. The psychomotor activities necessary to perform tasks accurately and with ease, utilizing acquired abilities and acquired knowledge and things like that. So a skill is something that you're able to do. So knowledge is what you lift, how much you can lift, so forth. Skill is actually lifting. Abilities are the capability to perform related things that skills open up. So you've got a particular skill which leads to an ability. Knowledge helps you to develop a skill, and that skill helps to develop an ability. And then other characteristics are those things maybe that are harder to measure: your values, your interests, your training, your experiences, your personality, and so forth. So as you think about the essential functions, the things on a job, what do you have to have as an individual to be able to do those things? You've got to have certain pieces of knowledge, you've got to have certain skills, you've got to have certain abilities, you got to have these other intangible characteristics to make you successful on this job. Number 6 is, now that you've gotten all these things, start grouping them together into logical buckets that serve as categories. Now, if we were talking about, let's say, a pet groomer job, you're going to cut the hair of the dogs, you're going to bathe the dogs, you're going to put little bows on the hair, you're going to clean up the room, you're going to disinfect the equipment, you're going to sterilize the table and so forth. You're going to interact with the owners and get information from them and communicate with them. You're going to create documents for people to be able to charge the customers. Those are tasks, and we can group those tasks into buckets. One bucket might be actually taking care of a dog, and that involves the cutting and the clipping and the bathing and the bows and everything. All that relates to taking care of a dog. So that's a bucket. And then you might say that a bucket is related to the environment, sterilizing things, taking care of equipment, replacing equipment, cleaning up. All those things are unrelated to the actual taking care of the dog, but they're in the periphery of that, making sure that the environment is safe. So you might have a bucket of taking care of a dog. You might have a bucket of maintaining the environment, two separate buckets. And then talking with the owner about what they want, what you can do, giving suggestions, working with the cashier to charge this person. All that is unrelated to actually doing the taking care of the job or taking care of the environment. So it is a bucket of customer service or communication skills or those kinds of things. So as we think about the job of a pet groomer, we might say, here's a whole bunch of things that they do, but basically they fall into the bucket of taking care of an animal or keeping the environment clean or communicating with others to properly understand expectations. Those are buckets. So as we look at the task statements and the essential functions, figure out what bigger buckets they go into. Those are the groupings of the job responsibilities. All right, step number 7 is to link those KSAOs that we identified in step 5 to specific job duties. Okay, in general, you got to have these kinds of knowledge and skills and abilities. All right, for this particular responsibility or essential function or task, which from this list make it more likely you can be successful with this specific statement that you have to do. If the specific statement is to trim the hair, cut the hair of the dog in a way that's aesthetically pleasing and whatnot, which are the skills, which is the knowledge, which are the abilities that you need to be able to cut that hair? You need to be able to good hand-eye coordination with scissors. You need to have the ability to remember what this style looks like from a book. So there's certain skills, there's certain knowledge, there's certain abilities that help you to cut the hair of the dog. So link those KSAOs to the specific job duties. Step number 8 is to get critical incidents. Now we kind of have an understanding of what the task is and what specific things make you successful in this task. Now we look at somebody who's done that task before, done it well, done it poorly, to figure out what it kind of looks like from start to finish. And then try to figure out what's the best way to communicate this, what it looks like, especially when it's done well, but also when it's done poorly, so that we can communicate it to people and they can get a picture of what it looks like. If I know what it looks like to cut the dog's hair well, I can do it that way. Knowing what is not acceptable, what's not really well done, I can avoid doing it that way. So there's the critical incident. Step number 9 is to weight the job duties for importance at time. So we say, all right, here's the things you got to do. These are the more important ones, or these are the ones that really have to happen now, even if it's not a big deal. So we can kind of structure them in some order. Maybe your job is 60% this and 20% this and 20% that. So figuring out what goes in that 60% is important. It also helps us as we think about the job duties and the weighting of the job duties to figure out what are those critical things that determine success. We would call them our BFOQs, our bona fide occupational qualifications. If you can't do this, if you don't have this skill, if you don't have this characteristic, you're not going to be successful. Well, you may sue me later because I'm a female, but no, it's because you don't have this particular characteristic that is critical to success on this job. How do I know it's critical? Because that is a major piece of what this job does. So weight the job duties. And then the last step is to construct the job requirements matrix. I don't really have a good example of this to show here, but if you go to page 149 in your book and look at table 10, it kind of gives you an idea of how you lay these things together in buckets, the different things that you have to do and the different skills and how those things, those rows and those columns on that matrix interact to help you know what pieces of skill really tie to what pieces of essential functions in what buckets that have the biggest impact on success on the job. So again, you see as a process of looking at this that it's a very intensive process. It takes a while to do it right. It's not something you just, one day you say, you know what, I think I want to write a job description for that job. Give me 20 minutes and I'll give you something. No, it takes a while to get it done right. So those are the steps that are involved. A couple of things to think about. Step number 11, actually, that I meant to have this on the last slide. It took up a whole slide by itself. Once you got all that done, now you can create the document. Write the job description, write the person specification. Remember from 4A lecture that the job description is a summary of what is done. It involves on the document the job identification, the title of the department, when we created this job description, when we looked at it last, when we changed it last, then a summary, the short paragraph. Here's where those buckets are important. The job summary ought to be a good sentence or two where you identify what those buckets are. The job groomer's role is to take care of animals and their grooming, to keep the work environment clean and sterilized, and to communicate effectively with customers and with coworkers. That's a good job summary because it identifies the buckets. It doesn't go into detail on the things that go in those buckets. But if I were reading that, just that short job summary, I would know pretty quickly whether I think it's interesting to me to apply for and whether I think maybe I could do this job or not, even without knowing the specifics. The buckets of grooming dogs, keeping the environment clean, and communicating with owners and coworkers, I'd have a pretty good idea of what this job is. Then the essential functions, the bullet list of the tasks. The second part, which we really haven't talked about in any of these videos so far, is the job context. That's the environment. And it includes things like, who's your supervisor? You report to this person, and where can I find this person? Are they available if I have questions? Available guidelines. What kind of materials are available if you have questions? There's an employee handbook, there's a training manual, there's an online site. There are co-workers, there are mentors, things like that. What guidelines do I have when I have questions? The third piece is accountability and the consequence of error. Why is this job important? What happens if I don't do this job well? Do we lose money as an organization? Do we risk the lawsuits? Things like that. Personal context. In the example of the dog groomer, pet groomer, you come in contact with customers on a daily basis. You come in contact with coworkers maybe a couple of times a day or once a week. Maybe you have meetings with your manager once a month or whatever. But who do you come in contact with? Why do you come in contact with them? And how frequently do you come in contact with them? The next piece of the job context is supervision exercised. For an entry-level position, that's basically none. You don't supervise anybody. Although you may be hired into a position where you supervise, you're a team leader or something, and you supervise a couple of people, or it may very well be that you kind of mentor somebody who's new. Once you learn what you're doing, we hire another dog groomer, that you kind of informally supervise them as a mentor, even if you don't have the ability to make decisions. The last pieces of the job context are the physical demands. Are you on your feet all the time? Is it a cold environment? Do you have to lift heavy packages? What are the demands physically that cause you to be tired, physically, emotionally, whatever, at the end of the day? Work hazards relate to things like, do you have chemicals that you work with? Are there loud noises? Anything like that that's not physical in nature, but they're in the environment that can make things tough. People yelling at you frequently. And then personal demands are what takes you away from your family and your lifestyle that you enjoy. Do you have to travel? Do you have to work weird hours? Do you work overnight? Do you have to work weekends or holidays? Those are personal demands because they take you away from your personal life. Then the third part is the subject of this particular video, the person specification. Typically the list of the KSAOs, the minimum education and experience, the licenses that you need. You need CPR license. Do you need a life safety, first aid license? Do you need a forklift license? Do you need a CPA license? Those kinds of things. You might have work authorization. Do you have to be a legal citizen? Do you have to have an H-1B? What do you have to have related to your ability to work and be recognized by the U.S. government. And then lastly, perhaps security clearances. If this is a very, very technical job or a very, very sensitive job, you might have to have certain types of background checks done, whatever. The last piece of the person specification job description are the disclaimers, and they're pretty standardized. We don't discriminate on the basis of race or gender or any of those kinds of things. We can train you for the job if you're not fully qualified, that sort of stuff. All right, so that's the job analysis. In summary, you're going to be asked this on a test, both in terms of the individual things and in terms of the basic differences between the two. If I asked you what's the difference between the job description and a person specification, you're going to want to know that the job description focuses on the job and the person specification focuses on the person. The job description is a summary of the things that the job entails and the environment in which the job is done. The person specification is a summary of what the person needs to be successful on the job. And then lastly, you don't want too many of the essential functions. It may be possible to come up with a list of 30 essential functions, but try to keep it to maybe 8 or 10, the most important 8 or 10. There may be hundreds of KSAOs, but focus on the most important things that really predict success. Look at the quote from page 150. The longer the list of things, the fewer the number of people who feel qualified and who will apply. So if I've got a list of 12 different things, it's like, man, I can only do 3 of those, so there's no point in applying. Whereas if I only have 6, I can do half of them, not just a fourth of them. So maybe it's worth my time. Focusing, it says, on the key characteristics increases the likelihood of hiring a superior employer, partly because more people apply, because they have better information, and partly because, as we talked about earlier, you really have an idea of what you're looking for. And then the last idea here is that there is a growing emphasis on competencies, not specifically specific knowledge or skills, but the ability or the potential to do stuff. Competencies, you can look at, there's tables in your book, in this chapter, that show you some examples of competencies. And competencies are typically things like critical thinking and decision making and communication and so forth. We're starting to see a transfer of the process or a shifting of the approach to the competency to do certain things rather than the demonstrated ability in the past. You're competent in certain things. You're capable of certain things. All right. That's enough for now. We've covered Chapter 4 in 3 different video lessons. In all, it's taken probably about an hour and a half of your time to look at these videos, but we've hopefully done it in bite-sized chunks, 25, 30 minutes at a time, so that you can really understand some important concepts from these chapters. You're ready now, you're ready now to take the quiz for Chapter 4. And hopefully, if you've looked at these videos and you've kind of understood, as I was talking about, the concepts and giving you examples of things, it makes sense in your head to where you can recall it, not just from a basic level of true, false, or multiple choice, but from a concept and how do you apply this thing. Good luck with that quiz. When you're done with that, come on back and we'll start talking about the interview process. Again, at this point, you're going to start working on your job description and what needs to be in those essential functions in that context area and in those person specification points. And once we have that done, then we're really going to have to think about the questions that we ask on our interview process and the matrix that we use to score our candidates. And that's what we talk about in the next series of videos, Interview 1, 2, and 3. So hope you're enjoying this, getting something out of it. Always look forward to comments about what I might do better in these things. Certainly one of the comments is, keep them shorter. I have a hard time doing that, as you see. But that's it for now. Go take that quiz, and I'll see you again when it works into your schedule for the next video lecture.